Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Friends, welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hannick and Mario Ramos Reyes here, and we're going to be discussing with our very favorite political scientist, Dr. Skylar Covich, the American Solidarity Party's just completed online convention. Well, as always, before we discuss anything, before we try to get our heads on a little bit straighter, we need to pray. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Lord, by the light of the Holy Spirit, you have taught the hearts of your faithful. In the same Spirit, help us to relish what is right and always rejoice in your consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Now, Skylar, I'm going to begin in medias res, in the middle of things, with a question that one of our listeners has asked you to address. And in a way, it's what I guess we could call a bottom line question. It is, will Brian Carroll, our presidential nominee, will he be able to get on the ballot, get his name there out in front of voters in all 50 states or some decent percentage of them? Will we be able to vote for him now that he's our candidate?
Great. Thank you, James. So we should be able to vote for Brian either on the ballot or as a write-in candidate in most states. The people who are most out of luck, I would say, are anyone in Oklahoma, where ballot access is more difficult than in any other state, and they don't count write-in candidates. And there may be 5 or so other states, like someone in that category. But as far as ballot access goes, having Brian listed on the ballot, I would say we don't want to promise too much, but we also don't want to set our expectations too low. It's going to take a few months to figure out how much fundraising can we get, what kind of volunteers can we get, because in most states, signature gathering can be done either by volunteers or by paid circulators. And I think we're going to try for a combination of those in many places. So the deadline in most states is, I believe, sometime between May and September. And each state has somewhat different rules. So last time, the Mike Matter and Munoz campaign in 2016, it started very late. And the only state that we actually got on the ballot was in Colorado, where all it takes is 9 people to be electors, and filling out those forms, and then $1,000. And so that will definitely be able to be done this time. Louisiana also doesn't really require petition signatures. It's almost as easy. We didn't quite get it last time, but we will be able to get it this time. Then you have Tennessee and New Jersey, which require under 1,000 signatures. Tennessee, I think, is 275. New Jersey is 800. Then you have about 7 or 8 states, I believe, which are about 1,000 signatures, which include Mississippi, Arkansas, Vermont, Utah, Rhode Island, Washington State. And then there are a bunch of states which are somewhere between 1,500 and 5,000 signatures. Pennsylvania and Ohio, two of the swing states, require 5,000 signatures. And Ohio is the one where I think there's the strongest state chapter already getting started with volunteering for that. And then for others, we'll just have to see. Now, California and Texas, unfortunately, are among the hardest to actually get ballot access. But we do know that we can definitely get write-in votes counted, which require dozens of people filling out paperwork to be electors. But we did it last time. We know we can do it this time. And so there might well be a bunch of states like that. Florida is one some people might wonder about. It's just inconsistent because technically the requirements should be very easy, but the state government, starting in 2016, started to treat minor third parties much more unfairly. So we're just a little bit unsure what's going to happen there. And I can, in the comments on some of the posts about this show, I can, take people's questions about specific states and where they're at. It's something I've been able to study a lot, but a lot more studying needs to be done because it's more than just knowing how many signatures it takes and by what date the deadline is. There's also some other specific rules that if one is not followed, the states will often be pretty harsh about that. So yeah, a lot of third party. There are some of the more wealthy third parties like the Greens and Libertarians, which do get to almost 50 states. And so we hope to at least move closer toward that goal.
Well, Skylar, one of the reasons why you're our favorite political scientist is you know what the dickens is going on and what the rules of the games are. Games. You know what the rules are of these various games. Could you say a little more specifically what would be involved in California? You're California. I myself am California. And as California goes, so unfortunately, for the most part, so goes the country. So maybe you could just expand a little bit and say something about what a volunteer would do and what kind of time it would take and how the volunteer would find out what to do in California.
So like I said, I guess I can explain why ballot access is so difficult in California for actually getting Brian's name on the ballot. It used to be a lot easier than it is now, but at a certain point, they made the ballot access laws much harder for new parties to get in. So it would take about 60,000 people writing in the exactly correct party name on their registration. And there's also some other paperwork that we have to fill out. And it would have to be done by this January. We just don't think we can get there. The other possibility some people have thrown out is to try and get the American Independent Party's ballot line. It just doesn't seem like a good possibility because of the history of that party and because of some of the dysfunctions in that organization. So we are going to get Brian listed as a write-in candidate. It takes 55 people at least getting a form signed to be presidential electors with the candidate's name, your own name, and the form has to be notarized and then sent into the California Secretary of State's office. Or what we might do is have somebody who lives in Sacramento actually get those forms sent to them and then take the forms into the Secretaries of State's office to verify them. We're still early in that process. It's the deadline is in a year, in October 2020. But we do want to get started as early as possible. So I guess, for For those who are on Facebook, there's a group called American Solidarity Party of California. If you go onto the Connect Locally page of the solidarityparty.org website, there's some email addresses for California as a whole and some specific parts of California. Now, aside from that, we want to get back to having candidates again for other offices in California, and of course, get Brian's name out there to people who might not know about him or about the party. So we're hoping for each county or each region of the state to have more local meetings, which have happened before in some parts of the state, but it's been a little bit less active the last few months, honestly. So we need to get people to coordinate meetings for their county. And it's going to look a little bit different in each county depending on the interests of the people in that county. Where are they best suited to bring the message of the party? And it's going to be a combination, I think. We could do some door-to-door campaigning throughout 2020. We could just get speaking slots at different events. We could do tabling at county fairs, which has been done in Wisconsin and some other states. We're just going to have to decide what kinds of things are most effective to best use the time and energy of the people that we have.
All right. Now, having looked at California and having begun with Oklahoma, where you have to have an oil well to get on the ticket.
Right.
Let's take an in-between place, a place that matters. A place
I should say first, Jim, you are willing to try and help get some events going in Los Angeles. I know you've actually met with some people.
Claro que sí.
Yes.
I'd be glad to.
Yes.
But I wanted to share.
Southern California has been more active than Northern California thus far, actually. But we have some good people in the Bay Area who might change that.
Okay. Having pledged publicly to help.
Yes.
I only on Oklahoma and Louisiana and California, but one more particular. I'm looking at this picture of this fella in Kansas, our co-host, Mario Ramos y Reyes, who has a deep political background. What would he have to do? And we'll get to our producer, Sebastian Mahfoud, after we take a look at the agenda that you put forward for Mario.
Where does Sebastian live anyway?
Well, no one really knows. But it's widely believed. It's widely believed that he lives in St. Louis. Yes, I see him affirming that. Although he is the vice president for a college and seminary in Cromwell, Connecticut.
All right.
You can only say, as so many do, go figure.
All right.
Go from Kansas to St. Louis, Missouri. Go ahead.
Yes. So Kansas did have enough organization in 2016 to get Madero Munoz listed as a write-in candidate, which I think just required filling out a form and someone turning in $20. The ballot access is something like 10,000 signatures, I believe. So there is an American Solidarity Party of Kansas group on Facebook. It's just not that active now, but there have been 5 or 10 people, throughout the history of the party from the state who have been active. It's just a matter of getting the organization together. So, but I think from what I know of the politics, there was there have been a bunch of Republicans who have been in favor of the social safety net and pro-life Democrats there. So there should be some good potential. It just needs someone to, I guess, maybe agree to be a contact person from the state for the state to get people together, see if people want to do some in-person meetings in different parts of the state. to kind of administer our Facebook group and a mailing list.
Now, just a quick question here, a follow-up question. Should Mario reach out to Mike Pompeo?
Yeah, I guess it doesn't hurt
Well,
to reach out to anyone, but I don't think this is probably not the right time for him to reconsider this.
Well, if he's looking for long-term employment, he'd better go with the American Solidarity Party. All right,
right.
that brings us by way of easy and natural tradition to the man who runs the circus, Dr. Sebastian Mahfoud. What can he do in St. Louis?
So in Missouri, somewhat similar situation. Not a lot of in-person meetings have happened in that central Midwest area. But yeah, there's an American Solidarity Party of Missouri Facebook group. We do need a contact person to get something organized. I think write-in votes should be counted. If you turn in, if people fill out electoral vote forms, I guess however many electors there are in Missouri, like about 11, I think. You need that number of people to fill out forms. I believe one from each congressional district, which was a stumbling block in 2016.
All right, he's taking notes furiously. I know how he
Yes.
operates.
Yeah, and I think some people.
Oh no, just a minute.
Yeah,
He's saying he not only is he banned from Texas, but he can't be politically engaged because he's married.
Oh, I don't think that stopped a lot of us who were in the party.
All right, all right.
But yeah, there have been people in both Kansas City and St. Louis who have expressed interest.
Okay, now, I want to back up a bit. Can you tell us, in a general sort of way, about how Brian Carroll came to be the nominee? There was a considerable, what am I chewing on here? Bubblegum. There was a considerable amount of debate within the party, which would be our best nominee, and Brian very definitely came out on top. Could you tell us a little bit about his background, a little bit about what he can bring to the campaign, and maybe even a little bit about the, I don't want to call them factions, but maybe we could call them caucuses within the party that looked at Brian, but also looked at a couple of other candidates?
Right, yeah, that's there's a lot to go in there. So Brian, just to start at the beginning, he joined the party in the summer of 2016. I remember getting the first email from him. So he had signed up for the email list, and I was emailing everybody who had signed up in California thus far. Shortly after I had joined the party, Desmond gave me the California mailing list. I was a temporary chair, and he told this story about, in his email about how he had just gone to protest the Democratic National Convention by himself, and he mentioned that he's had a really strong call to service and had a lot of really interesting life experiences as a school teacher, moving toward the retirement in the next couple of years, and how he had international mission experience in Colombia. And we got to meet in person. I believe Dr. Hanning was also there. We had a convention in San Luis Obispo, California in October 2016. And I believe it was there that Brian first mentioned the idea. It was not a definite idea at that point of running for Congress. Brian lives in Visalia, California. It's represented by Devin Nunes, who has a reputation of being a very partisan Republican and Trump supporter. And he did. He ran for Congress in 2018 against Devin Nunes and 3 or 4 Democrats and a Libertarian. It was at a time that was, but challenging for the party, and it really was a great source of positivity for the party to have his campaign to get behind. And he was able to get some local media. He marched in parades and was in debates with other candidates and did very well with that. And he was always a source of unity, bringing people together. And during this campaign, he mentioned, I think, to a few of us, the idea of possibly running for president. And again, it was a dream at that time. We had no idea whether it could really happen. But he mentioned that he would probably be retiring, and he would have time to he would have the time and resources to travel. And I believe it was right after Thanksgiving 2018, he decided to run for president. And this was at a point where, we had no idea whether, anybody else would want to run for president. We had no idea what the process would even be for a nomination. And what we ended up deciding to do was to allow all the voting members to vote in an online primary or convention or whatever you want to call it. I guess this could be like maybe a hybrid of those two things. And using the system of ranked choice voting in case there were more than 2 candidates, as it turned out to be. And that this would be in September 2019, so that we would know who our presidential candidate was going to be very early on. So it did end up that 2 other candidates came to challenge him. Joshua Perkins had been in the party since 2016 and tended to be a favorite of some of the people who consider themselves on the left of the party. But he has a lot of, very nuanced positions himself. And then Joe Schreiner, who has been running for president, I think, almost constantly since the 1990s, and had actually been endorsed by the American Solidarity Party back when it was just a small discussion group in 2012. So the ideological lineup of who's a Bryan supporter and who's a Joe supporter was not really quite similar to the factions in the party from before. So yes, Joe, I guess it could be fair to say Joe has more of a bent toward radical politics than Bryan. He has more of a bent toward social conservatism than Bryan. But there were a lot of us, myself included, who consider themselves fans of radical politics and social conservatism, who ended up supporting Bryan, as well as a lot of the centrists in the party tended to support Bryan. And I think that the left of the party either voted for Joshua first or Bryan first. And so I think that the difference between Bryan and Joe supporters is just basically whether they bought into Joe's style, which is more of a brash, very direct, if I can describe it that way, more self-referential kind of style, where, and people who believed that his, presidential campaign experience would be able to bring media attention because of the fact that he's been running for so long, and the fact that he's, traveled around the country, particularly for this presidential campaign. People who thought that would bring media attention and bring a story were the ones who were most likely to get really behind Joe, along with a few people who really wanted to prioritize having a candidate to oppose same-sex marriage. more strongly. But I think what Brian brings to the campaign, and I did end up publicly endorsing him, is that I think that he can bring the party together, whether you're left or right or center or radical. Uh, he has a way of explaining things where he talks about the world, the situation of each issue as it is, and okay, what are some of the ideal solutions, but then also what are some of the more incremental solutions, and how can we, bring people together who already support our message while also, talking to people who don't necessarily support all of our message. And I think, like I said, he has a lot of life experience and connections too, that I think are very good, and just a very gentle way of speaking that I think it's something that we need right now.
Okay, two quick follow-ups on that, and then I certainly
Yeah,
want
sorry,
Mark.
that was very long-winded,
No,
but
that
a lot of
that is.
information to get out.
Listen,
Yeah.
we have nothing against long winds in this hour. What we're mostly revolted by is sound bites. So, have your say. I have two quick follow-ups on Brian, and then I cordially invite Mario to get into it. Would you say that we could say about Brian that he has both a civil and a sapiential tongue in his head?
Sapientia is so Latin for wisdom, I believe, right? In some sense.
Yes.
Yes. That is very fair.
All right.
And yeah.
Next thing. A lot of people have little marks up and down their wall to measure which kid is how tall at a certain point. But heck, we could do that with age, couldn't we? Now, if you had a guy named Bernie and a gal named Elizabeth, and then back to a guy named Joe, in terms of their longevity, where's Brian on that?
Let's see. I just read his biography for the press releases, and I believe that he was born in 1949, so that's 70 years old. So, and yeah, a few years younger than them, but
Ha
not a lot
ha!
younger.
Ha
Yeah.
ha! So if anybody makes any disparaging comments of an ageist nature, we're ready for them. Okay, Mario.
Well, yes, I have been listening very attentively what Skylar was telling us, and I have a follow-up question about something you said, Skylar, and you were mentioning that there were candidates who were more on the left, and the other would be more centrist. I assume there was a candidate who were more on the right. Now, my question is about that. How do you define that? I mean, in relation with the platform, in relation with some kind of ideology, where this way of classifying the candidate come from?
Right. Yeah. It's of course, labeling people is often not entirely helpful. I guess I can, Joshua, has been considered more on the left of the party because I think, at one point when he announced, he did explicitly say that he wanted to represent that point of view. There's even a Facebook group, which I think has been mentioned publicly here, called Leftover Lefties or something like that, which I think Christy has mentioned on here. He definitely has a reputation for not wanting to talk about the some of the socially conservative issues like opposition to gay marriage, which is now back in the platform, or religious liberty. things like that, which tend to put us more on the right. Although he definitely, has a strong anti-abortion position. He also wanted to really emphasize racial justice. However, the other two candidates definitely agree with him on that. I don't think many of their positions were particularly different. I don't think Brian or Joe ever called themselves on the left or the center or the right. It's just that Joe tended to be thought of as a candidate of the right because he's very, very socially conservative, but he actually might be the most left wing on some environmental and economic issues. There are other complications, like Joshua, even though he was considered more on the left, he actually had a very more nuanced position about gun control, as I think all the candidates did. So why do I say that Brian was centrist? Well, it's more in his approach to things. So, for example, with religious liberty, he is, to someone who's more on the left of the party, which I define as not wanting to talk about that as much. Brian might actually seem more to the right on religious liberty. He absolutely believes it is a fight that we need to keep up, that religious liberty is under threat from some of the Democrats. But he also talks about it in a way where he wants to come to he focuses on what he feels like are the realistic solutions. I can say that, as opposed to just coming out in anger against some of the threats that are there and demanding that it go completely the other way. May not be the best way of explaining it, but I think he has that approach to every issue. Even like foreign policy, for example, which is actually, there are very different ideological alliances within the party about foreign policy. Brian will often mention that there's, yes, we've been in far too many wars, and that needs to change. But it's also not like, a haranguing call to demand an end to all wars, or something like that.
Follow up, Mario?
Well, I think it was very clear, the answer, but I still have some hesitation in classifying the candidate being part of the right, centrist, or left.
Right, no, it's good to hesitate.
Right, because there is I think that classification can have come out of the French Revolution or the liberal ideology. And when we use this terminology in order to apply a party which precisely tried to somehow go beyond that, base their views not as much as on what we may call freedom, rather the common good, by applying this standard, somehow doesn't show who we really are as a party. In other words, we are borrowing a way of understanding politics, which is precisely what the duopoly is doing. Try to somehow label you in one way or another. And so if that then is the case, we are just duplicating what is out there.
Right.
That's my concern. Yes, go ahead.
Like I said, I was careful to not really describe anyone as on the right of the party. And center is a little bit different. Like I said, the distinction is actually more between center and radical, which is actually more of a matter of temperament than even ideology, I think, in this case. And so, yeah, you're right. This, for the most part, especially between Brian and Joe, who were, really the leading candidates, because Joshua wasn't able to be as consistently active in campaigning. Left and right was not really the main factor. There had been times in the history of the party where that was the main factor, and I think it was actually good that's not really the case at this point, at least when it came to the presidential campaign.
Yes, just a brief comment. Ortega y Gasset, the great Spanish philosopher of the 20th century, on a comment he was making about Spanish politics, said once that being on the right or on the left, or being classified as a member of the right or the left, is two ways of being an idiot. In other words, you are just missing what counts in politics, which is reality. And so instead of looking at things as they are, you are somehow building your lenses or your structures through which you are seeing reality. And so ultimately, politics is reduced to ad hominem attack, and that's idiocy. That's it's just a side comment, but Jim, you want to say something?
Well, let me say in defense of Skylar that he's struggling to work past all of this. And we commend him for his efforts. And we look for even greater efforts in the future. But now we've got to turn to the platform. And I just did a thorough read. I'd done some skimming, but I just did a thorough read of the platform yesterday, which makes it possible for me not to have forgotten anything. Were I to have read it thoroughly a week ago, it would be touch and go on the memory thing.
Well, it didn't exist a week ago.
But yes, I stand confected, as they say. Now, could you give us some of the highlights, Skylar, of the platform? And I think it was hotly debated, and I wonder if you could point to some of the critical debates. Now, in theory, we only have 20 minutes left, but what the heck? I can see that our producer is still with us. He's not making any faces beyond his usual face, so don't feel rushed for time.
All right. So yeah, one of the most critical debates was not even over what should be in the platform, but exactly what the process would be for creating proposals. It's a challenge. You had 28 people elected as delegates, all of whom are volunteers. Many of them had really unique personal circumstances that came up this summer that made it harder for them to prepare for the convention. And so there were a few of us who really wanted to make sure that we got teams together to make sure that the proposals were ready. I have to think. I wonder how Dr. Hannig would have contributed to those debates if we were a delegate, but he declined to run for delegate. So even some people who agreed generally about the direction of the platform that often found it difficult to figure out how all this would work. But we did end up getting teams together, and I was involved in this process at pretty much every step. And then on the day of the convention, there were several main proposals based on topic, and then each of those proposals could be amended, and then there would be a vote on each proposal. And then after all that was done, to make a long story short, there was a vote on the whole platform among the delegates. So what were some of the main changes that ended up in the platform? So there, in 2017, language about traditional marriage, marriage being the union of a man and a woman, was taken out. And so in this platform, in the family section, which is right after the life section, it was put back in. In the civil rights section, there are many more specifics when it comes to religious liberty, including an issue that I think all of us on this show have personal reasons to care about, protecting religious colleges from, harassment by liberal states like especially like California. The civil rights section, there's some after religious liberty. There's some expanded planks on criminal justice, and so all of these. Not just criminal justice, but also racial justice. Mentioning specific racial minorities that have faced discrimination, and measures that can be taken on that. And so there was some debate about the language of all of these. So, for example, with gay marriage, okay, exactly how far do you go? Do you put in some measures for families which are not, quite so much a traditional family? And so there were some compromises on that. Now the economic section became unexpectedly contentious. There was a group that put together a much more radically distributist economic section, and it included things like calling the financial speculators vampires, and and
they're only werewolves. They're werewolves, not vampires.
Right. And so when this passed initially, there was a lot of concern by some about whether this would be too negative of language for a platform that, and that was actually one of the key debates too about much of the platform. Like the people felt that the last platform went so out of its way to be positive and conciliatory, but then a lot of us felt to some extent, maybe the platform should be focused more on being principled and bold for some of the things that we feel like need to happen in this country. And so eventually, in the end, we decided to take the vampires wording out, but it's still a very distributist economic section that more boldly talks about the interests of labor and small business over the large corporations.
In some ways, Skylar, doesn't it seem to be the most detailed section of the entire platform?
Yeah, it is true, and it is a little bit of a different writing style, which I think some of us had some concerns about, but it has there's a bunch of sections that are pretty detailed in certain ways, but yeah, it has even some like specific taxation policies, which it's always a challenge to then break those down and explain both the reasoning for them and what they actually are.
Yes. So in bringing the platform forward and giving it its proper weight, I would think that the campaign would want to give a big chunk of time to that economic section.
Right, it is a good idea, especially because it is way more unique compared to the two major parties, and it can be a way to educate, especially the pro-life community, which is our main demographic, but even others as well, about these ideas. So foreign policy and environment also added a lot more detail. The more boldly anti-war foreign policy, while also one that sees some engagement with the world as important. and environment, there's some pretty detailed things too, like adding in concerns about bee die-offs and streetlights that are too bright and all kinds of other things. There's also some more directly localist ideas in civics and environment, especially, which go more into detail about how communities should fix certain problems. And finally, I guess two other things. First of all, one interesting change that was made toward the end was to put healthcare in the life section. So like the first half of life section is more traditional pro-life concerns, abortion, death penalty, assisted suicide. And then the healthcare planks are there. The idea that really is a life issue, protection of the human body. And then the family section also has one more healthcare plank about avoiding gender transition for children. But the final point I want to bring up about the platform is it mentions all three of the main ideologies that the members of our party tend to come from. So in the preamble, we put back a mention of Christian democratic values, is like Mario, I believe, and quite a few others came to this party because of an interest in European or Latin American style Christian democracy. And in the preamble of the life section, we specifically call ourselves a whole life party, which is another term for the consistent life ethic. And then in economics, we specifically refer to ourselves as distributist. And so these three communities have been, I thought we need to have a synthesis and recruiting from them.
Yes, that was one of my questions to the panel of the three gentlemen, and they were discussing about precisely the distributism, consistent life ethics, and Christian democracy. We need a worldview which includes these three proposals. I have a question, Skylar, about immigration. Does the platform introduce any change in that in the language?
Yeah, there are some pretty important changes to immigration. We do address some of the problems that have been going on at the border, and make clear that we really oppose the inhumane conditions that are there, and we are demanding something better. But then on the other hand, it is really important to make sure that there are real solutions to the drug trafficking that's going on. And so what we want to do is to be very very accommodating of immigrants. Those immigrants who have come here and been law-abiding and hardworking. And I mean, the compromise is that we particularly want protections for DACA, for the Dreamers, and then some other, we call a reasonable accommodation for others. There was some disagreement about whether to call for directly a path to citizenship or just permanent residency. I mean, I would have gone for a path to citizenship personally, but I mean, we made clear that we want to protect them. On the other hand, there are legitimate concerns about crime. Those need to be dealt with. There are concerns about what's going on in these other countries that are really the root causes of immigration. We added in the foreign policy and immigration section, we talk now about how we intervene politically in Latin America and economically in Latin America in a way that destabilized those countries in some senses. And that's part of why there have been such huge numbers of immigrants who were, crossing the border unsafely. And then the final major change that a lot of these things were under the surface, but we made it more clear, is we want to make sure that immigrants are well integrated into communities. So they're not just, totally different communities who, who don't know and are not known by other people. Oh yeah, and then we did also add something about working conditions too. That the fact that immigrants tend to work for wages that no one else will accept, and that causes horrible conditions for them and also tensions with others.
Well, the ticket isn't complete, though, is it? There's still the need to have a vice president. And
Right.
as I understand it, the National Committee extended the period for determining a vice presidential choice for a week. But as those of us who gather here every Friday know, a week goes by pretty fast.
Right. Yeah.
What's going on there? What's going on there, Skylar?
Right. So Joe Schreiner declined publicly, and pretty much wants to do his own thing, and I mean he's willing to be helpful to the campaign, but he does seem to be interested in possibly continuing his own presidential campaign. Joshua, I don't think he ever really made a post declining publicly, but I think it's clear that it turned out he was not able to do it either. And so, yeah, there is an ongoing search for a running mate. I mean, I won't say anything about who specifically.
How about Marianne Beauvais?
Yeah, that would be an interesting possibility. I think I read somewhere that she didn't think she'd be able to do it, but I mean there have been many names floating out there, and I don't want to publicize anyone who declined or is thinking about it, but yeah, I know Brian's working hard on it, and we really hope to have someone very solid very soon.
Well, it could be that desperate times call for desperate measures.
And what would that mean?
All right.
Perhaps Jim Hanning for vice president.
That's what I'm saying. Desperate times might call for desperate measures.
Two Southern Californians is.
And one other thing that should be said about the platform, I don't believe that it mentioned a certain proper name that begins with a T and ends with a P.
Right. Yeah. We.
Now that's an accomplishment in itself.
Right. Yeah, we didn't actually mention either of the major parties for that matter, which like the 2016 platform mentioned something like the red-blue divide, and we decided to not even put that back in because we want to stand on our own and just give the country a message that's right and not worry about the major parties or anyone in them.
That's right, and let's just see how they feel about not being mentioned. All right. Any final thoughts here?
It's been, it was a very exciting presidential campaign and platform convention. I think we produced a good platform that's going to, and we have a great candidate, and we look forward to more people knowing about the party.
Yes, my final thought would be I would just like lots of people to read the platform.
Oh, yes.
And talk about the platform.
Yes. It is longer, but it's not too long.
And I'd like to put it before people that our listeners know. Say, my good friend, would you like to read our platform? I'd really like you to look at it and tell me what you think about it.
Right. I guess you'll have to do the open door episodes on each section or plank
Well,
even over again.
that's an excellent idea. An excellent idea. We will work through the entire United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and there's no reason at all that we can't work through this. And we sure will. Mario, just a quick, it's almost now a postscript. Would there be any special things? You usually post in Spanish, and there are a whole group of people that respond to your posts in different ways. When you think of the people you're engaged with in your projects, is there any kind of reaction you'd expect to the platform?
Well, I think they will react positively, most of them. And generally, they don't know much about the American Solidarity Party because of the language. So one of the first, I think, tasks that we need to do is translate the platform.
And who's going to do that? Who's going to do that, Mario?
Well, yeah. I'm going to try to do that. But right. I think it's a good idea. So
yeah, it would help. I know somebody tried to translate one of the earlier platforms, but it turned out they didn't do a good job, and that kind of turned people off of, like, people started to think that it couldn't be done because it's hard to translate some of the concepts across languages. But I think Mario, yes, and there are a couple of others, like possibly Meru Hunt in the party, who has could be really good at getting that done.
Skylar, do you think that Mario and team should aim for dynamic equivalency?
No.
Again, I'm not a translation expert. I would tend to trust Mario's judgment on this one.
Well, Skylar, you need to answer no about that.
No, right.
All right. Well, Skylar, thank you enormously for taking time to join us. We're just about at the end of the recording, and I know that our producer does his level best to get the podcast ready to post, and we will do that very thing. Let's end now with today's gospel reading. Jesus told his disciples a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? No disciple is superior to the teacher, but when fully trained, every disciple will be like his teacher. Why do you notice the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the wooden beam in your own? How can you say to your brother, "Brother, let me remove that splinter in your eye," when you do not even notice the wooden beam in your own eye? You hypocrite. Remove the wooden beam from your eye first, then you will see clearly to remove the splinter in your brother's eye. The Gospel of the Lord. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Godspeed. We'll be back next week.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.